Greetings and good health to you, and welcome to another issue of Open Up with myself, Sello Maake Ka-Ncube. And as always, we start with a little quote. And the quote today is from Martin Luther King and Martin Luther King Jr. And he says, "Our scientific power has outran our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men." Yeah, words of wisdom. And my guest here today is going to help me unpack the world of spirituality. And Siyabonga Mkhize. When I saw you the first time, welcome, my brother.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, and thank you for sharing your time with us. I remember seeing you for the first time on an ETV. Said I'd come for an interview, but they were already interviewing you. And I looked at this young man speaking outlandish things about spirituality. And I was like, hey man, but then later I realized, okay,
Yeah.
And I once visited your father. I don't know if he's ever told me.
Serious?
Yes, I have.
He's never told me.
He's a work should he keep secrets for himself. God is not going to tell us what I'm going to see. We ask God. And yeah, man, I was fascinated. I don't want to lie. Tell me about, where were you born?
Okay. My journey is an interesting one because what I studied and what I ended up doing, two completely different things.
Right, yeah.
So, Siyabonga Mkhize is a young black man, engaged, father of two, boy and a girl. And I come from a very, very cultural home.
Yeah.
Isintu nesiko was something that we lived by.
Yeah.
And then Ubaba became a healer. He initiated. So as I grew up, I watched how spirituality had the potential to heal.
Right.
I saw how culture was not there to be a prison, but rather something for us to enhance our spirituality. And then I went to a very, very English school in Houghton. And then I realized that a lot of our young black men and women don't have the means to navigate these white spaces and still maintain their African spiritual and cultural identity.
Yeah.
And it's not because abafoni and they don't want to. It's because they don't have the resources or access to the resources.
That's exactly. Yeah.
And the narrative that was around at the time is that ancestors are these big bad demons that punish us when we misbehave, or on the other hand, ancestors are demons. And so I've spent my entire life trying to change the narrative and teach people that African healing is a science. It's an indigenous science. African spirituality is the foundation of African culture, and that if it does not enhance you spiritually, then it cannot be culture.
Wow. And then you are a young man, Zulu boy, and I would say you're going to a predominantly pro-Western school. I mean, from grade 1 to grade 12. Was it in that environment?
That was then from grade 0 all the way up.
Yes.
Yeah. So I saw the entire system. So I went to the entire white schooling system, and I saw how our young black men and women were really struggling to navigate these spaces.
That's it, yeah.
And I think if I had not gone to the school I had gone to, I would not have seen the problem.
The problem, yes.
Yeah.
And then would I be right to say now, what helps you is because of your dad, because of the the whole cultural thing at home. Did that have an influence on you?
Oh no, definitely.
Oh, and again, didn't you find yourself maybe almost living in a world of confusion? So say, but why? And even coming home said, Dad.
Oh, it was initially it was a confusion.
Yeah.
But I think it all began with my grandmother. So there are there are lessons that I speak about that my grandmother taught me.
Okay.
And the reason I understand the spiritual energies and understanding the spiritual wound that a woman carries is because my mother taught me those lessons.
Okay.
Yeah, well, so initially I had a confusion because I'm like, wait, eskoleni, you know, sikhuluma isilungu all the time, and then when we get home, there's this. So I was struggling to navigate that whole that duality of everything, and that, and then I realized that this is the problem, that confusion exists, that there are two separate worlds, and that's because our society, like Martin Luther King says, misguided man but guided missiles.
Yes.
Right? Because society, as I'm not talking about Africans when I say black people, I'm talking about Africans as a whole. Right? Are misguided. The fact that a non-black person can think that African spirituality is not needed is a problem. Because the principles of spirituality, right, are where race, gender, creed, culture, sexual orientation, gender expression, all of that falls away, and it's just about you as a spiritual being.
You know, I'll tell you that I had a very interesting. I remember, I have a passion for issues that deals gender issues, gender-based violence and all that. And I remember, I think a topic was set that is African culture. What is it? A contributory factor to gender-based violence. But then I remember reading a book by Sheikh Diop. Sheikh Diop is a Senegalese anthropologist, and he has written a book about creation. And he was saying, because also there is this argument that there is African creation and European creation. And he actually dispelled that myth to say there's African and European. And he said creation only happens at one place. And where it happened was in Africa. And then there are people who migrated and went up north, And now that provoked a position in me to say, because now that says everybody, even the European, actually Africans, in origin.
No, they are.
You see what I mean? And now if we want to say African culture is a contributory factor, so it means they themselves, they are Africans, and African culture actually exists in them. So what are we saying when we say, with this kind of, saying African culture? Are we talking about human culture or what?
Okay, so
I want to get you
for very, very long, we spent time asking the question, what is the difference between culture and habit? In other words, what is isiko, right, and isintu, or imkhuba?
Mkhuba, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Mkhuba's habits.
Right.
And if we look at what the problem that has happened and what I'm seeing is we've taken isiko, which is the cultural practice which is there to enhance your spirituality.
Yes.
And we've infiltrated it with imkhuba.
Yeah.
Let me give an example. The act of umemul, which is the coming of age ceremony of a young girl. 21 years old, and the spiritual purpose behind that ritual is to say to the ancestors, thank you for the blessing of this young girl. She is now ready to leave. She's going to be leaving home. Bless her with the knowledge, the wisdom, and the resources to survive adulthood.
Yeah.
Right. It's got nothing to do with her having a child, her getting married, but most of all has nothing to do with her virginity. So some people say that no, you can't do umemulu for someone who is not a virgin.
Okay.
Right? So now, if you look at patriarchy and you look at the misogyny and the need to control women's sexual expression,
right, yes,
which is imkhuba, right, has bred the virginity principle. And they have ruined isiko. right? So now when you have, now the problem is why some people say that no, culture is patriarchal, misogynistic, or contributes to
Yeah.
what they are referring to is imikhuba that has ruined culture, and they don't separate imikhuba or the habit from the cultural principle, which is spiritually beneficial to you. So now, essentially, that is what I want to do. If I can do that and pass away 50, 60, I've done my job.
Right.
It's for people to say, I can engage with culture free from imikhuba. But now the problem is, people are so entrenched in imikhuba that they think that this is what defines the culture.
But if ever, I don't know if ever you've had this conversation with your dad, is that when what has caused us, caused us to have imikhuba? So have you ever thought about that?
You see, imikhuba will go with the status quo.
Yes.
At the time.
Yes.
If the status quo 50 years ago says black people here, white people here,
right,
then imikhuba will be up. Will be generated by the status quo. What society deems is correct. So, as society progresses, we should be. That's why you see the rituals have stayed the same, but it's what our perceptions or our ideas around the rituals that continue to change. So now we need to teach people that if lemikhuba, the best way to separate the two is it going to be spiritually beneficial to you? Does it make you want to engage more in your culture and in your identity? And if it doesn't do that, then imikhuba. And we need to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Whereas isiko, right? I mean, it's a beautiful process. They slaughter a cow for you.
Yes.
You get lots of money, and they put money in your hair. So the process is all about celebrating you. It's about no one else. It's not even about your parents. They don't even say thank you to your parents.
Can you do umemulo for a married woman?
Yes, you can.
Yeah?
You can do umemulo. Every single woman can do umemulo. It is
at any time of their lives.
Isigo,
it's not
the need for isigo does not expire.
Yes.
So you can do it obviously when you're married. Now the family that would do it for you would be your husband's family.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah, that's all the changes. But the need for it. That's another beautiful thing about culture is that it doesn't expire.
Here you are, a young man, and you negotiating, traversing this space of growing up as a young man, and you're growing up in a westernized, westernized space at school.
Yeah.
But at home,
very cultural.
Very cultural.
Yeah.
This duality, how did it affect you? And if ever you're going to make maybe a young man who basically is going through the confusion now to say, I don't know whether I should follow this, this African thing, and I'm not too sure about it. And you may have to make him understand, because he's actually basically maybe going through the struggle of understanding the two worlds. How do you bring them together for this young man?
Okay. So, growing up, my only difficulty was, how can I take what's at home and take it with me everywhere I go?
Yeah.
Right? And how do I carry it in me? And what I looked at were the principles, the fundamental spiritual principles behind it.
Yeah.
Right? And the spiritual principles underlying culture are that of self-actualization, number one. And number two, understanding ukuthi umsamo wami, umsamo wako, umsamo womunye umuntu. Which basically means how I treat myself is how I will treat you, and inevitably that will create umsamo of the world. Because when we talk about umsamo, we talk about this, apart from it being a space, but it's more of a collection of the spiritual consequences and outcomes of the decisions that I've made. Right?
So that's the definition of umsamo.
That for me is the definition of
and
umsamo.
As you explain it in this Queen's language.
Yeah.
And if you're going to explain it in a scene, what would you say umsamo is?
Umsamo, apart from it being indawo la ukhuluma khona nabaphansi.
Yes.
Umsamo inkabi. Umsamo wena. Umsamo ugogo nomkhulu. Noba mkhulu nokhokho bakho. Umsamo imthelelo, right? Yenqumo abazithathile.
Yes.
But most of all sibheka imimoya. Nokuthi lemthelele, how did it affect imimoya yabantu?
That's it, yeah.
Your spiritual predisposition is what umsamo is.
Yes, yeah.
Depending on, and so for a young person sitting at home wondering, how do I navigate lento?
Yes.
Ukuthi ngiphila isintu kodwa South Africa indawo yesilungu. Is it simple as everything you do has a spiritual outcome.
Yeah.
Right? Whether uphila esilungwini okanye uphula isintu, everything you do have a spiritual outcome. And that ultimately determines the spiritual predisposition that your children will inherit one day. So whether ukhetha ukuphila isilungu okanye ukhetha ukuphila isintu, at the end of the day, awukwazi ukushintsha ukuthi egazini lakho. You know, you have the blood of kings and queens and great healers coursing through your veins. Awukazi nje ukushintsha lokho. Yabo? So ukuphila ingenye indlela ngeke kushintshe lokho.
Yeah.
So why not embrace and work with that which is already innately in you?
Yes.
Exactly. So that you can become the best possible version of yourself. Because without that, you cannot expect to become you can't expect to reach self-actualization if there is a part of yourself that you are denying or not working with.
Yeah. Because, you say a very interesting thing that everything that you do has its what? Spiritual
outcomes.
Spiritual outcomes. And, I'm trying to take it to a little place where I think I can understand it. And you can maybe want to broaden it for me. There's this thing of saying words, mind your words as they become, mind your thoughts as they become your actions, and mind your actions as they become your habits, and mind your habits as they define your character. You know what I mean? So, we're having a conversation about acting and all that. And one of the things is that for me, it's like actions define character. So basically now you talking about whatever you do has spiritual action, and that's an action. What you do is an action. So basically, if ever we are going to talk to, I think, the African people to say, mind your action or mind your thoughts. Well, your thoughts, words, habits, and then the actions that define, or the habits that define your character. So what kind of thoughts, what if ever we're going to influence an African thinking, what would be that African thought that will become words, and words that become actions, actions that become habits, and habits that define the character, the personality.
Thank you for using that phrase, because that phrase is another beautiful way to articulate Musa. And to go back to what would be the thought?
Yes.
The very first thought process should be understanding ukuthi number one is humility.
Yeah.
And understanding ukuthi mina ngoba ngihamba la emhlabeni sengihambile already. Number one. Number two, ngihamba nabanye abantu as well. So I think Maya Angelou put it perfectly. She says, I don't walk with one, I walk with 10,000.
Yeah.
And understanding that within you are about 10,000 different careers, characters, gifts, crafts, knowledge, wisdom that is untapped into.
Yeah.
Right. And it's up to you to decide which one you want to tap into.
Right, yeah.
Right. But you cannot do it on your own. To acknowledge yourself, to acknowledge who you are and what you are, will begin to reveal that particular ancestor with that gift. Your ability to do maths comes with that particular ancestor was a mathematician. You're a great actor, right? That gift comes from that ancestor.
Right, yeah.
So to say that, when you say I'm a gifted individual, what you are saying is that I have many people contributing their gifts. That's why one's career is never the same.
Yeah.
What you were good at now is something that you weren't good at 20 years ago.
Exactly.
And the thing you were good at 20 years ago, maybe now it's not that great now. Not to say that you're not good at it anymore, but it's because that ancestor has come, has served their purpose, has blessed you with that wisdom and the knowledge, and has moved on. So the very first thought process that as Africans we need to understand is everything you do, right?
Yeah.
Everything you do is not your work, but someone else's work, a higher being's work, right? And we need access. It's all about access. This whole thing of being, the only difference between you and I and, you know, your credo mutos and all these other great healers is access. They're more connected, so they have access to their spiritual gifts. They have access to, the only difference between you and a healer is really the fact that they have access to that ancestor that can see more. Right? We were talking about acting and training.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And
yes.
What did you say? You said it's all about access to sensations.
Exactly.
You see?
Yeah.
That's all it is. And what do? You train yourself.
Exactly.
The same thing, the exact same approach you have for acting is the same approach you'd have here. You train yourself.
You know, actually, one of the things that I have said was that, you know, and I was using acting with, comparing acting with Christianity. And I say, you know, in order to become an actor, you know what I mean? In fact, let me say, in order to be a Christian, first you've got to do, accept Jesus as your Savior. You know, accept the Lord as my Savior. And after accepting that the Lord is your Savior, what are you going to do? You're going to immerse yourself in the scriptures.
Yeah.
And then after that, do what? Live according to the scriptures. And then now actors. First and foremost, in order to be able to act a part, you have to what? Accept it. You know. And after accepting it, what do? You immerse yourself in the script. And then after immersing yourself in the script, you live according to the designs that are in the script and live up to them. So basically, what you're saying is that it is just so important that we define what we want to be. And that definition, again, goes to the same thing, to the actions. Because even in a character, you know what I mean, let's say in a script of, a role, that character is, character of Macbeth, it's written what he does. You know what I mean? He fails first and foremost to take the heed, that the three witches warn him, say, hey, when a Basoba fair is foul and foul is fair, and he disregards that, but from there on, then he what? The wife decides, kill Duncan. And then he kills Duncan because he wants power, and those actions are defined, and we see, hey man, this man ambition took him, to the other side. Here we are, as an African people, much of ourselves is, how do we begin to sow the seeds of this self-knowledge, self-actualization? How do we do that? Have you ever thought of it? And especially because I always like to say to my boys, And but because you are the generation that is actually, carrying us forward.
Start with your name.
Right.
Start with your name and your surname. My big bees, Abani.
Yeah.
So, igama lami Siyabonga Mkhize. My full name.
That's it, okay.
Right? The reason they named me Siyabonga is because I'm the last born, and before that my mother had a miscarriage.
Okay.
So they said Siyabonga for the blessings of the... And on top of that, we're finished with kids, because I'm the last born of 6.
Okay.
And then Africa. My father said, in everything I'll do, I will always put Africa first. Lase Africa.
Right.
And then Mkhize, Siyabonga Mkhize for lengane ezoboyisa ilizwe laka Africa. So by knowing your name defines your purpose.
Yeah.
Once you have a purpose, you know, okay, fine, this is my purpose. I can then begin to become that person.
Yeah.
You're talking about knowing the character and then knowing and then immersing yourself in
exactly.
the script.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes it's not about rituals, herbs, medicines. If you want to start somewhere, tell me the story of your name.
Yeah.
Masithi Ntate Sello Maake Ka-Ncube. Sibiza bani? What are we manifesting?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, but who am I calling? Yeah, but if you can't describe the story of your name, how are you going to understand what your purpose is on this world?
You know, and this is what I think I once heard, and this is just to test whether Ubaba ukshirele now and or Kona Lisa's God higher. But I remember somebody sent me a voice note, and he was basically, I think they're explaining the whole thing of children. You know, of basically like, what is it? What we would call, you know, illegitimate children or children born out of wedlock and all and that whole process. It is something that is just so prevalent. I mean, we're talking about, you know, single parenting. You know, I can't remember who was it, but it's an African American woman, and she was saying that when it was only young black women who were having children out of wedlock, they were saying the children are illegitimate. But once this thing started spreading into the white neighborhoods, then it became single parenting. you know what I mean? But I think for me, and I mean, I am a victim, whatever, or a perpetrator of that. But the whole thing of women raising children by themselves, I think it's a social malady. What are your thoughts on that?
So, before I answer that question, let's understand there's no such thing as an illegitimate child.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. The second thing is, you see, Africans, we need to understand that not everybody is joined together to have a child and get married, right?
Right.
We must also understand that we have spiritual predispositions. If Siyabonga Mkhize and Siyabonga Mkhize, right, historically speaking, had a man and a woman get married and have a child, then my daughter and your son might come together. But they're brought together by the spiritual predisposition, not with the intention of marriage, but with the intention of exchanging spiritual gifts so that this child can serve the higher spiritual purpose. Now, your question about single parenthood. Right? Single parenthood is coming from the fact that we don't understand ourselves and our identities in terms of what is. Single umuzi. Umuzi unemlenze u4. Umama abantu abadala. Isikolo, which is umsamo, and then ikish, which is the home where people would eat.
Yes.
Right? Okay? That's what umuzi is.
Exactly.
Umuzi has a matriarch and a patriarch. The patriarch doesn't necessarily have to be the head of the house. Doesn't have to be the father, right? It can be the woman's son. Okay? So the reason why we're seeing, or my concern with the single parenthood, it comes from the fact that we don't understand what umuzi is.
Yes,
umuzi has been built with the intention of what? Enhancing spirituality. Right? Our homes are not built with spiritual foundations. Hence, it is so, and we don't understand ukuthi ingane yisipho esiphuma kubadala. Right?
Yeah.
And there was this Pastor Andrew, he always talks about, he gave a sermon talk about blessings should bring more blessings.
Yeah.
And that if you don't honor the first blessing, you cannot expect other blessings to come. That's why sometimes when you can have a first child, right? You forget about that first child from that first fling. But now you find a woman who's perfect and she's fine, you're fine in terms of health as well, and you're struggling to conceive. But your ancestors are telling you, we've already given you a child. You didn't acknowledge the first blessing. So when you don't, and when you lack spiritual identity, it's going to be very difficult to work when you lack when you can't build a moose, it's going to be very difficult to work
Right, yeah.
So single parenthood, it's a sad reality, but my fear is that it's going to. I don't think it will continue because we're becoming more spiritual and we're slowly going back. But up until we can teach young black men and women the gift of a child,
right?
The spiritual gift of a child. We're not going to move forward.
Yeah,
it'll be difficult to move forward.
Yeah, because I find it interesting because I mean it's something that I personally grappled with, and I guess if I probably maybe was living in a very culturally based environment, and I think my thinking has always been just observation of the human behavior and the human condition, but also looking at the problem that arises out of it, and I think for me was having been a experience that I wasn't raised by my father, but I was raised by my stepfather, and in a very weird way that I felt strong paternal links with my stepfather. But knowing my father had just helped me understand maybe something about me, which is something that has to do with genetics, even because somehow you inherit certain traits that your parent had, whatever DNA and all that, and that DNA is not only just but in blood or in physical form, it also somehow extends into temperament. You know what I mean? And one thing that I discovered was I do have my father's temperament. And I guess and for me, now that you say this, it makes me wonder what were the previous generations in his line, from his grandfather and whatever, that they did certain things which have now spiritual outcomes. You know what I mean? Is that something that you've maybe grappled with in that way?
No, it's an ongoing process that now that you mentioned, now that you've articulated it quite well. You've articulated my thoughts, let me say. So if we look at your father and going back to the generations, and we talk about generational curses and traumas and so on and so forth. The best thing for you to do, I'm using you as an example. Sometimes you don't know what happened before your father, right? But you can assume, okay, fine, if my father was like this, perhaps it happened before. It started somewhere. Right? But your stepfather, he stepped in and he raised you as his own, right? By you not doing two things, by you, one, saying thank you to your father's family and his ancestors, two, being a present father as well, the family curse ends. Sometimes curses don't need rituals or fancy things to end. Sometimes curses just need. Sometimes we shouldn't go too far back or get too obsessed with the history, especially when the history can become too convoluted and confusing. And sometimes it's a matter of saying, let me thank the one who was here, and let me be a present and better father to my son and my daughter.
Exactly,
And it's that simple sometimes.
I have this take that young people today, talking. I'm still working on my brand. Still working on my brand. But I have this position that I've taken that one's brand is formed long before they're even aware that they are a brand. Physical manifestation of that is a fingerprint. I'm like, now when you go to the bank, as much as they will ask for your signature, but the defining thing about you or who you are is your fingerprint. Somebody can come and copy your signature, but nobody copies theirs. So at the end of the day, for me, this, just manifests the fact that you are already a brand. This is the physical manifestation of that. But now, then there's got to be the spiritual manifestation of that. if somebody who's constantly saying, I'm working on my brand, what are they actually saying? Because like now, the physical,
is there?
It's there. It's made, done.
So my take on I'm working on my brand.
Yes.
Is doing the training process.
Yes.
Is I know my name, so I know my purpose.
Yes.
But to become Siyabonga Mkhize, the person that, from the Mkhizes that goes and brings forward is Lasa Africa.
Yeah.
I need to become that person.
Right.
So when I say I'm working on my brand, I mean I am becoming more.
Okay.
So I can give more to society.
Yes.
Yeah, well, because my gift, I am not, in other words, I'm almost not worthy of my gifts, to say that. I need to become worthy. I need to become more.
Yeah.
So when you're working on your brand,
that's it, yeah.
You are becoming the person that is worthy of that name and those gifts and that purpose, which is tied to your name.
Yeah. What are you doing to spread this gospel?
Oh, quite a bit. So... First things first, I teach African spirituality.
Right.
Very, very simplified, easy to access, easy to engage with. But when I do it and I speak in Zulu, other cultures complain that they can't understand the Zulu.
Yeah.
When I speak in English, then the Zulus complain.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's a tough one. So I just decided, okay, fine, let me speak in English and then I'll have like a separate class for those.
Zulu.
And it's all online, so it's easily accessible to anybody
Okay.
around the world.
Okay.
Obviously, weekly on ETV, every single week. Speaking about African spirituality. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And then, of course, I've recently been doing a couple of reality TV shows.
Right, okay.
Focusing on couples.
Right.
And looking at the spirituality, because it's such an interesting phenomenon to try bring two individuals together.
Yeah.
Because you're essentially bringing two lineages together. Two individuals with their own traumas, curses, burdens, blessings, confusions.
Hey, I wish I had more time with you. But I think there's this notion about umhlanga lwasembo. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, it's another Siyabonga Mkhize, another book you're speaking about.
Okay.
It's another, he actually came now, Wonobab, I think.
Okay,
it's another Siyabonga Mkhize who wrote that book.
Okay.
And I haven't had the time to read it.
To read it, okay, all right. Mvana, I am, I'm so glad. I'm so glad I met you. And, I'm meeting your father through you. But I've already, in fact, if I hadn't, I think I went to see him for the first time, I think last year. Well, first and only time, and I became aware of him, I think one time listening to Radio Metro and then later seeing him on ANN 7, and I thought, hey, I need to go and see him. And, I think the teaching that he was imparting really, really inspired me. And I would, say I'm glad that he didn't only pass on his DNA, the physical one, but I guess even the spiritual. And, it goes also with this, intellectual side of it. And I think we are enriched more, I think as a people, for him having passed on, this DNA on you. And for now, hold it with Bame and Siyabonga for being here and sharing, your understanding of these words. And I'm sure young people out there will understand, will actually get a glimpse and begin that process and take on that journey. Thank you, Mfana Zamzini. Thank you. Ake, Nizizwele, you've heard for yourself. Hey, the most important thing, or even maybe the very first step towards self-actualization is know your name, know and understand where it comes from. And from me, Sello Maake Ka-Ncube, I bongiti salan gatle. My Italian bati arrivederci. Gravozzi.